Om Shanti, a very warm good evening, everyone. Welcome to our tonight's talk. It is so sweet that the COVID situation has brought all of us together in such a unique way. And our tonight's topic is cultivating self trust. So, what is all this concept about developing self trust? How do I develop self trust? And how do I develop the trust in others? Is it important to develop trust? And why is it so? So, to answer all our questions and to discuss on this topic, I find pleasure to invite a very special guest speaker, Sister Belinda from South Africa. A very warm welcome, Sister. Sister Belinda, for past 32 years, has been patiently and gently using the tools of meditation and experimenting with the power of thoughts on herself, using these methods to help her overcome cancer in 2010. She has found a deeper understanding of the connection between soul and body. Sister Belinda is a member of National Coordinating Team of Brahma Kumaris in South Africa. Welcome, Sister Belinda, once again.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jyoti, and good evening to everyone, and a warm welcome to our topic this evening, which is an important topic for us in today's world, cultivating self-trust. As Jyoti mentioned, we are living in extraordinary times. I think even a year ago, we couldn't imagine that we would be in these current circumstances. And as we start the new year of 2021, I think many of us are looking deeper within ourselves to try and find some of the answers that will help us to cope with a world that is ever changing, a world that is a lot more insecure than it was just a year ago. And what makes it insecure is that it is changing, and sometimes change is challenging for us. We all seek to be happy. I think that's one of the fundamental desires and requirements for life. And the happiness that often we have tried to attain has come from out there, an external source of happiness. But now we find ourselves in times where it's not so easy to find that happiness. It's difficult to meet with each other, to lead the life that we refer to as normal. And a lot of our happiness came from those external sources. Now we are required to look within ourselves and to find a different source of happiness. And one of our sources of happiness is, in fact, self-respect. If we can respect ourselves, then we find that inner peace and happiness from within. But self-respect is an elusive thing. Again, we have taken our self-respect from external things, from the things we do. It could be our talents, our skills, our background, our appearance, our education, so many different areas that we have taken our self-respect from. But again, in a world that is ever-changing, those areas where we've taken our self-respect from are also changing. And so we find ourselves in a situation where sometimes we have self-respect and we feel good about ourselves and therefore happy. And other times we lose that self-respect. Perhaps someone didn't acknowledge us, or perhaps we didn't get that recognition, or a skill we had, we no longer have anymore. And so we see that our self-respect is on a roller coaster, sometimes up and sometimes down. Now, the component behind true self-respect is actually what we're going to talk about this evening. And that is this aspect of self-trust. This means that if I'm able to trust myself, then automatically I will have self-respect. Just think about it for a moment. Who are the people that you respect in life? Or should I say, what is it in people that makes you respect them? And a key element of that is actually that you trust them. And I think that unless you trust someone, it is very difficult to respect them. And it's no different for the self. We can try very hard to have self-respect, self-love. But if there isn't that element of self-trust, it is very, very difficult. So that is why we're going to look a little bit more deeply in this area of cultivating self-trust. When we look at the people that we respect and we ask ourselves, what are the qualities that win our respect? And very often we would say that it is because they are authentic, they are real. And so we respect them. We also say that they do what they say they're going to do. In other words, they walk their talk. And this again allows us to respect that person. And the same thing applies for the self as well. If we are authentic from within, if we are able to do what we say we're going to do, or to be what we say we're going to be, then we are able to respect ourselves and also to trust ourselves. This aspect of self-trust is often a challenging one for us because we think of ourselves in a particular way. But then when something happens, it triggers a different response from us. And that difference shakes our confidence in ourselves and shakes that aspect of trusting the self. Many years ago now, I had an experience of being in a small gathering, and someone in that gathering, was actually a meeting, said to me in front of everyone that they didn't trust me. And I'm not sure about for you, but for me, it was probably one of the most devastating things that anyone could ever say to me. It was a huge challenge. And I left that meeting, and for some time, I felt a deep sense of lack of self-trust and insecurity. And one of my teachers helped me to understand that particular situation. And I started to explore how important it is if I want to win the trust of others, if I want to be trustworthy, it is so important to trust myself. I cannot expect others to truly trust me if I don't trust myself. And so that really began my sort of deep exploration of this subject of self-trust. And so I've come up with 3 steps that we can explore this evening. They are actually 3 questions that we can ask ourselves in a way of exploring how to cultivate this self-trust. It's very, very important, first of all, to get to know myself. I think perhaps many of us, we don't give enough focus to this area of knowing and understanding ourselves. And why it's so important is that if you don't know yourself, and situations and people trigger different reactions from you, these reactions inevitably will disappoint us and make us feel that we are not worthy of respect. So the first question that we are going to look at is this question of, what do I really want in my life? It's a very important question. And I hope that perhaps in the next day or 2, you might take some time to reflect a bit more deeply on these questions. But I remember at the time when I was struggling with lack of self-trust, I really started to reflect deeply on what it is that I wanted in my life. And for most of us, when we think about this, we realize that what we want in our lives is very simply goodness. We want goodness in its different shapes and forms. We would like to be kind and compassionate. We would like to be tolerant, to have understanding, to have empathy. These are very natural to the human soul. Our desire to be the very best human being that we can be. And it's important to actually name what it is that we would want for our life. Because when we give it a name, it becomes something concrete, something solid, not just a theory or something airy-fairy, but really something that is important. It's a value that we have and that we pursue for our lives. I found that once this became clearer to me, it was like breathing a deep sigh of relief. I think one thing that we're afraid of, perhaps, is our own selfishness. And it's so easy to revert to selfish behavior, to selfish reactions to life. And so we tend to be afraid of our own selfishness. But what I've come to understand is that the only time that we resort to selfishness is when we ourselves become insecure. Insecurity is the cause of many of our behaviors that we would rather not have. And we need to address that insecurity. We live in a world that becomes increasingly insecure. The things that we could depend upon in the past are no longer there, or they're very fragile. And so we have to find our security in a different place. And the greatest security is actually in understanding ourselves in our true identity, which we'll talk a little bit more about a bit later on. So the first question is, what do I really want in my life? And to explore that deeply, to be very sure about what it is. The second question that I would like to look at is, if goodness is really what I desire in my life, then what are the obstacles that come in my way? Why is it that I'm not able to express that goodness in a natural way? Because if I were to express it in a natural way, I would learn to trust myself. It's this difference between what I feel and then my own reactions. This is what is causing this lack of self-trust. We really have to be able to see within ourselves our real goodness, our virtue, and our highest qualities. And that is when we build that self-trust. So what are the obstacles that come between us and that self-trust? I think for each of us, it varies a lot, because we all have our own unique challenges, and even our selfishness manifests in different ways. As I mentioned, that selfishness comes from insecurity. And so one of the things we need to address is this insecurity. You know, the authentic self, the real self, or what we might call the spiritual self, is absolutely secure. because the spiritual self is the eternal self. And many of us believe in the soul, believe in the spirit, and yet we still find ourselves feeling deeply insecure. And one of the reasons for this is that we are not consistently in our highest identity. Our default identity is still what we might call the ego identity. The ego identity is what we can also call the false self. It is the identity that I've created for myself in an endeavor to feel safe and secure. But the ego identity is temporary. It is connected to everything physical, including my body, my skills, my talents, perhaps my family, my education, and all of the things that our ego identity is built upon are all temporary. They can be here today and not here tomorrow. And so the ego self is constantly in a state of insecurity, constantly anxious about preserving my reputation, preserving the respect that others have for me. The ego identity is constantly looking for ways to reaffirm itself. And we do that through looking for the praise and recognition from others, getting acknowledgement from our achievements. And we find ourselves in this situation where this false identity, which is our more common identity, keeps us in a state of insecurity. So our spiritual path actually is to move from that ego identity, which is so temporary, to the spiritual identity, which is the eternal identity. It is the identity of the soul, the spirit, the inner being. We can call it by different names. And we need to come into that awareness and also to practice being in that higher consciousness, because this is the solution to our problems of lack of self-respect, feelings of insecurity, our reactions that we see coming from ourselves to different things, and causing us to have this distrust in ourselves. So why is it that coming into our true identity is going to help us to change from a state of lack of self-trust into trusting ourselves? I think many of us agree that the innate qualities of the human spirit are qualities of goodness, of divinity. But we may believe in that, but we don't see that in our practical lives. And so this is where meditation becomes very, very important for us. in meditation, it gives us the opportunity for that inner silence. And we need silence in order um, to truly look at ourselves, to have that introspection, so that we can get to know this higher self, this divine self, which is extremely trustworthy. And so this brings us to the third question that we need to ask ourselves. We trust that which is authentic. So, how is it that we can actually develop that authentic self? And as I've said, the authentic self is the spiritual self. It is that part of ourselves that has always existed. The ego self is constantly changing. We've seen how the ego self can be happy because we are loved, we're appreciated, but equally can be unhappy when someone doesn't acknowledge us or even doesn't greet us. Our self-respect can go down. But the self-respect that we develop from knowing who we truly are as spiritual beings, that self-respect cannot be affected by anything external. The reality is that we may be popular or we may be praised one day, but what happens the next day is unknown, especially in today's world where people change their minds so easily. People are so influenced by circumstances. And so we need to find a source of self-respect that can be unshakable, that can be solid. As I've mentioned, our world is fragile at the moment, and we don't know if it's going to change or when it's going to change. But what we do know is that we need to go within ourselves and to find an inner resilience that will stand steady in the face of any challenge that may come our way. And those challenges are coming in different ways. We may be challenged with our health or the health of our loved ones. We may be challenged with the financial security, our jobs. So many different challenges that we face now. It's almost impossible to find physical solutions to create a sense of security from within. And so it is more and more important for us to find that sense of deep security from the spiritual self, the eternal self. Just for example, if I take the aspect of the spirit or the soul, and I just say to myself, I, the soul, am immortal. It's a very powerful statement. But we have to shift that concept of the soul being immortal to an experience for ourselves. That we actually begin to feel that that is the truth. That as much as we have our physical form, each one of us has a physical body, and the soul expresses itself through that body. But we know that the soul existed before the body came into being, and the soul will continue to exist after the body is gone. And who is that soul? That soul is me. And when I say me, I mean the me that has a unique personality, that me that has so many pure qualities, so much divinity. This is who I truly am. And it's when I connect with this eternal self, this immortal self, that I really begin to recognize that I am extremely trustworthy. And I need to practice. And this is the doing part. It's very nice to listen to the theory, but actually each one of us has to now put into practice. And this is what requires effort for us, to find a spiritual practice for ourselves that is meaningful and that connects not just to our mind, but really to the heart. Because trust is about the heart, and love is about the heart. You know, you can't love someone unless you trust them. When you lose trust, you also lose love. And so learning to appreciate and to love the authentic self, the eternal self, the spiritual self, is our journey on this spiritual path. And when we begin to experience this self-trust, it's almost as if we can relax into who we are. We are no longer constantly on guard in case we slip up, make some mistake, say the wrong thing, have some negative reaction to something. Because it's when we slip up that we lose that trust in the self. So step by step, we begin to be aware of, firstly, our thoughts. This is where everything begins. Because if our thoughts are not positive, if our thoughts are critical, then at some point we will disappoint ourselves by saying unkind things, by reacting in a negative way through our words and ultimately our actions as well. So the mind is very, very important for us. And again, this is why a practice of meditation is so valuable, because meditation teaches us to think like a soul, to think differently, to think in spiritual terms. And this is important because it's our thoughts that govern our vision, how we see things, the attitude that we have towards people and situations. And attitude is very important for us. If we can have a spiritual attitude, we don't have to be afraid of our reactions. We can truly relax because our attitude will color everything from our thoughts to our words to our actions. We need to develop that spiritual attitude that not only am I a spiritual being, but everyone around me is also a spiritual being. No matter what the behavior, no matter what the circumstances, let me hold true to that spiritual vision for myself firstly, because that will help to dissolve the insecure ego. And then secondly, let me hold that vision for everyone, from my own family to my community and to the world. That vision that we truly belong to each other. As souls, we are family. We may see a lot of difference at the level of the physical, but at the spiritual level, we are truly a family of spiritual beings. And so what I'd like to do now is I'd like to take a pause and let us experiment with some of these ideas, because we really want to shift the theory into an experience. Because if I can experience who I am, that is going to stay with me. The theory will come and go. Tomorrow we may not remember it, but the experience stays with us and molds us and directs our spiritual efforts as we move along this spiritual path. So now I'm going to invite you, wherever you are, to sit comfortably. It's good to be alert as well. So to sit upright and in a comfortable position. And let us take a moment to just connect with ourselves. We've heard a lot, but now we need to just reconnect with the inner self and the inner world that we are occupying. We remind ourselves that behind these physical forms lies the soul, the invisible self, and yet so real, because it is the soul that is expressing itself constantly through the physical form. There is the mind, where thoughts emerge. And this mind is very valuable for us. It is here in the mind that we can choose to think differently. This is the starting point of developing self-trust. Let the mind be a sacred space, a holy space, a space that we respect and value. From here, as we create these spiritual thoughts, we find that the next step are our feelings. Again, so valuable. So often our feelings are not what we would like them to be. We feel dissatisfied sometimes, discontent, even harsh thoughts and feelings about the self. But as we recognize the beauty of this sacred self, the feelings change. I begin to experience a kind of silent happiness, at peace with myself, as if I can take a nice deep breath and sigh, content with myself. The soul, by its very nature, is so lovely, immortal, eternal, pure, and innocent like a child. Full of unconditional love, a love that is silent and yet very deep and very pure. I begin to grasp how extraordinary I am. And when I say I refer to this not the I of the ego, the I of the beautiful, divine self. It is this self that is seen by God. God loves the soul, respects the soul unconditionally, and encourages the soul to step up and be that higher self, so that as we move through life with all its ups and downs, with all the change and the insecurity of the physical world, we remain stable, constant, unshakable. And there is a deep sense of self-trust and natural self-respect that nothing and no one can take away from us. Thank you. So
Thank
over
you.
to you, Jyoti.
Thank you, Sister Belinda. Thank you for taking us through the beautiful meditation experience. Thank you for sharing the depths of cultivating trust. I really loved the way you connected the topic with your own experience when you shared that somebody commented in the audience that they don't trust you. And I recently came across a quote written by someone that said that to be trusted is a greater compliment than to be loved. So I was just reflecting back that it is so true that somebody trusting me is so important than they loving me. So I like the point, the way you shared that self respect we develop from knowing who we truly are. When we know who we are, then we can develop the self trust. But I have a question here is like in relationships, sometimes when my trust is being broken, so how do I build up again? It is so difficult to build up that trust again in that relationship.
Thank you, Jyoti. That's a lovely question. And it was very much part of my experience that you mentioned. Um, what I learned is that when I lose trust for someone, it is actually because I don't trust myself. And this was a lesson that one of my seniors taught me at that time, um, because I was trying to understand the other person's perspective. Why was it that they had lost trust in me? And so it helped me to understand them, but also to see in myself that if I am not able to trust someone, and it's true, sometimes people do, they break the trust that we have. But if we just come back to ourselves and really question if we trust ourselves, because if we trust ourselves, then the behavior of others can be what it is, but we will not be affected by that. In other words, our love and respect for that individual will not be broken. But the seed of it is self trust. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel you have answered all our questions. Thank you for sharing. You also said very well that if there is no trust, there is no love. And appreciate and love the authentic self. And that's how we will cultivate the self trust. Thank you, Sister Belinda, once again. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in with us. Our next week's topic is that is on 22nd of Jan, same time, 7 p.m. The topic for the talk will be Pioneers and Their Legacy. And the speaker for the talk is our European Director of Brahma Kumaris, Sister Jayanti. So we will see you all again next week. Thank you for tuning in. Om Shanti.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.